Okay, hello bearded bee people. Welcome back to B&K Bees for another episode of our Beekeeping Crash Course. This is probably, top 3 in terms of importance of these videos. This is a video that's going to cover a lot of information that I really think you should digest during your first year as a beekeeper, because you're going to run into a lot of these problems and you're going to have to find out solutions to them. So yeah, that's what this is about, common problems and relatively easy solutions. So let's get into it. One of the first and most common problems a lot of beekeepers have are laying worker colonies. And what a laying worker colony is a queenless colony of bees that has been queenless for an extended period of time. And what this causes is the worker bees' ovaries develop and allow for them to lay eggs. So worker bees have ovaries just like a queen, because remember, worker bees and queens are created from the exact same genetic source. So the only difference really, other than the way that they were created and the epigenetic changes that happen during their larval and pupal development, the only other difference is that the queen goes out and gets mated and can lay fertilized eggs, whereas the workers have never been mated and can only lay unfertilized eggs. So when this happens, after that extended period of queenlessness, these worker bees, in a last-ditch effort to try to spread their genetics, will start to lay eggs. And unfortunately, that is a very difficult problem to resolve, because at that point they don't have any inclination to accept a queen. They don't have any inclination to stop destroying all these combs by laying 10 eggs in each one and making them all drone combs. So it's a difficult problem to rectify once it starts. So my first piece of advice to you is to prevent it from happening before that. So if you've got a queenless colony, the first thing that you should do is to go find a frame of open milk brood. When I say open milk brood, I mean open brood where there's the larvae swimming in royal jelly. That brood pheromone, the smell of the brood, will inhibit those worker bees' ovaries from developing. So while you're waiting for them to build a queen, or while you're waiting for your queen to arrive in the mail, or whatever it is you're going to do, make sure you give them open milk brood to dissuade them from beginning the process of becoming laying workers. Now, if it does happen and you catch it early, and what I mean by early is only a couple of cells are being affected, you can give them that frame of brood and in most cases end up installing a queen, and it will work. But if you don't catch it early, if the problem is more developed than just a few cells, there's a ton of laying worker bees in that hive, then the problem is too far gone. And my advice to you is to shake those bees out and remove their hive. Let them to drift into nearby hives, and then you can split one of those nearby hives later on to make that number back. The reason that I don't recommend trying to do what most online tutorials will tell you is because what they tell you to do is to continue to give frames of brood from another hive. So you give one week and then 2 the next week, and continue and continue and continue. But all of these resources can be completely destroyed and wasted in this process. Whereas you can just cut the losses, shake them out, split another colony to make that number up, and not go through that headache wasting all those resources trying to fix it. Now let me say, shaking the bees out to allow them to fly back into their own colony with the idea that laying worker bees cannot fly, that's a myth. I don't know how that myth continues, because certainly these people have to be attempting that. It never works. It won't work. Those laying worker bees will fly back, and even if they don't, other worker bees are going to continue to lay eggs. So don't shake them off 100 yards away and follow other people's advice that the laying workers can't fly back, because I promise you they can and they will, and that will not fix your problem. So definitely don't take that as, don't try that. Just cut your losses if it's a developed laying worker issue. Cull the hive out and split another one of your hives to make that number back up. Okay, and then I also say here, do not try to introduce a purchased queen into a laying worker colony that has been in that condition for a while. They are going to kill that queen. I know it's weird, it's counterintuitive, but after that laying worker instinct has started, they don't have a need for a queen. They realize that they're in that last ditch effort, and it's very, very difficult to get them to accept a queen. And even if they do accept a queen, which I've seen, a lot of times the laying worker stuff won't start, and that queen won't stop, and that queen won't have the ability to establish a brood nest, and so therefore she won't have the ability to create all the pheromones necessary to inhibit those laying workers, and eventually that colony is just going to die out. So like I said, if you caught it early, give them a frame of milk brood, and then you can consider adding a queen, and they're probably going to accept her. If you didn't catch it early, cut your losses, shake that colony out, cull it, and split another one to make that number back up. Okay, so here's a picture of a bad laying worker issue. You can see that the laying workers are not neat or tidy in their egg laying, so it's really easy to tell the difference between mated and laying queen and laying workers. Be mindful of the fact that freshly mated queens will lay a couple of eggs in a few cells for a short period of time, but even that's usually pretty easy to tell the difference between a confused young queen and laying workers. But regardless, this is the laying worker situation on this slide. Okay, so chilled brood is an issue. A lot of people get split happy, or they split too early, or they split too thin, or maybe they tried to split with a package that hadn't, replenished with foragers yet, and they all left. Regardless of how it happened, if you have a frame of brood that gets chilled and dies, it can cause more issues than just that dead brood. That dead brood can be a bacterial sink, and what I mean by that is you can come up with problems like European foul brood, which is the bacterial infection in the hive that can really stunt your hive's growth during the spring. So if you do experience, once again, the best method of dealing with chilled brood is to not have it happen in the first place. So don't be messing with brood frames when it's too cold, and don't be setting out splits too thin if it's cold at all. But if you do get chilled brood, the best advice I have for you is to just get rid of that frame very quickly. Go feed the stuff to your chickens, and then throw that frame away. Because, once again, there is that possibility that it has had that time to kind of grow bacteria in the dead brood, in the soup that is that dead brood, and it can cause a big, big issue. So, once again, just cut your losses, take that frame out, throw it away, get it away from your bees immediately. And we'll talk a lot more about European foul brood and other diseases in the third portion of this crash course, which is only a few videos away. Okay, so robbing. Robbing can happen at any time of the year, but it's generally, it's more likely to happen in the fall. And what robbing is essentially what it sounds like. It's one hive robbing the resources out of another hive. They are not polite about it. They will kill a hive. They'll completely destroy a hive in a matter of hours. So it's definitely something to be mindful of. The biggest thing that you can do when you do see robbing, or when you suspect robbing might be starting to happen, is to reduce the entrance sizes on the colonies you're concerned about getting robbed. So that means in the fall, when all of the flowers are done blooming, to reduce those entrance sizes until the cold of winter has started, to add the ability or to strengthen the ability that colony has of defending themselves. If you know exactly which colony is robbing out the other colony, another thing you can do is to take the cover off of the culprit. So turn the offenders into defenders by completely removing the cover from the top of their hive. That will, when those robber bees come back to deposit their booty or their loot or whatever they call it, they'll realize, hey, their own hive is in a susceptible and vulnerable situation, and they'll stay and try to help to defend. This can help, but in most situations it's difficult to tell which the culprit is. So it's not likely that this is going to be the one rule or one piece of advice that's going to help your robbing situation. The better piece of advice is to try to reduce those entrance sizes before the robbing starts. Okay, so in drone laying queens, it will look similar to a laying worker situation because you'll see nothing but drone cells, but this is a much easier situation to rectify than laying workers. All you have to do is pinch her and install a new queen, or pinch her and give them a frame of eggs and young larvae with which to create a queen. The queen mandibular pheromone in that hive throughout that whole time is enough to keep those worker bees' ovaries from developing, so they're not starting laying worker processes at that time. So you can just pinch her, wait one day, and then install another queen. Honey in the brood area is definitely an issue during the nectar portion of the year. If you're running doubles, it's not such a problem. They'll move it around and bring it up into the upper boxes, and generally doubles have more than enough room to allow for a little bit of backfilling. If you're running singles, it's a bigger issue, and if it's a full frame that's completely clogged with nectar, the idea is to immediately remove it and replace it with something empty. But as is true with most of these problems, the best idea is to prevent it from happening before it happens, and to do that, you really should try to keep empty cells above the brood area. If you do that, the bee's natural inclination is to move it up above the brood area, and so they'll do all they can to keep that brood area free of honey. Okay, and then another issue is bees won't move into a new box. Usually that's a case of there's not enough bees in the box before to warrant moving up into the new one, or there's not enough sugar coming in to warrant growing and developing. So the only real thing that you can do to help this out is to make sure that they have sugar coming in. Make sure that your frames are well waxed, because they're not likely to draw stuff out on like bare plastic. So make sure that they're well waxed, and then make sure that it's the right time of year for your bees to be moving up into a new location. Other than that, feeding them will help them draw more wax and put them into a mindset to grow. But, like I said, it's really a matter of having that food, being the right time of year, and having enough bees in those boxes. So if all that's true, if it's the right time, you've got food coming in, and these frames are well waxed, just wait, they'll move up. They'll end up doing it eventually. Okay, so bees won't draw comb. This is another situation where the likely culprit is the fact that you don't have a well-waxed frame. If you're certain you have a well-waxed frame, or it's just beeswax foundation or freeform comb or something like that, then it's probably a likely situation that there's not enough nectar coming in. Bees are not into building up if it's not the right time of year, and one of the great indications of the right time of year is nectar coming in. Also, it takes a bunch of sugar to create wax, so that is an essential aspect to a colony that is going to draw wax out. So feed syrup, re-wax the frames, or just be patient for them to make their moves when they're ready to. Another one is the bees won't cap the honey. This is either because it's just too hot and humid and they can't dehydrate it enough, or the nectar stopped flowing and there wasn't enough honey to fill out the frame. If it's just too hot and all that, do what I had told you before, which is to prop the top up on top of the inner cover to allow for more ventilation throughout, and then also make sure that they have an upper entrance, which will once again also help for a ventilation kind of air flow throughout the hive, which will aid them in their quest to dehydrate the honey to the proper water content. But otherwise, like I said, it's because the nectar stopped flowing, and then in that instance you can utilize the if you can't shake it, take it method, because it's likely dehydrated enough, there just wasn't enough for them to cap over the cell. And then another one is that the bees won't stop making queen cells. This is largely because you've been inhibiting them from completing their plan. So if they have a supersedure cell and you just don't want them to create it, and you pull that supersedure cell out, that didn't dissuade those bees from superseding their queen. That just made them have to create a new supersedure cell. So the best advice I have for you here is to try to use all of the context clues available to you to figure out exactly what those cells are for, and then work with the bees toward figuring out a solution. If they are emergency cells and you keep pulling them, then pretty quickly they're going to stop making cells because there's not a queen in there. If they're swarm cells and you keep pulling them, you're likely to lose a swarm and end up being left with a hopelessly queenless hive. So don't just keep pulling queen cells. Once again, use all the context clues that I've taught you here in this crash course to try to figure out what they're trying to do and work with them to help them out in that, and that will help, you know, stop them from creating more queen cells. Another problem is that you can't find your queen. My first piece of advice is don't worry about finding her. If you see eggs, nice little neat single eggs per cell, she's in there doing what she needs to be doing. But I know that's not enough for most people, especially if you're just getting started. It's so much fun finding your queen. So my next piece of advice would be to do a thorough inspection. And I don't mean just inspecting every single frame. I mean pulling every single frame out of the box. So sometimes when the cover gets cracked, depending on a queen's personality, her mindset might be to run to a dark corner or run away from the sound. So as you continue to go through a colony and you're inspecting frames, she's moving away from you. And if you're continuing to put frames back in behind where you were, she can move back to what you've already inspected and just create a very frustrating time for you. So if I have to find a queen, like I'm requeening with a queen cell, or I'm splitting and I have to move her, or I'm selling a queen, or any situation where I absolutely must find a queen and she's just being stubborn, I'll pull every single frame out of the box. I'll set them off to the side, I'll lean them up against other hives, pull them all out, inspecting every single one. She's not on that one, she's not on that one, pull them all out, and then after you're certain she's not on any of the 10 frames, she's likely in that box on a wall or on the floor or somewhere, and you'll have the ability to find her. If you didn't find her that first time, you inspect those frames as you continue to go through, and you're very, very, very likely to find her using that method. Okay, and then another issue is absconding bees. This is usually either a case of a package installation gone wrong, or a swarm installation gone wrong, or a high mite load or disease infestation that the bees are trying to escape. Either way, you know, the fixes to all that should be pretty self-explanatory in terms of keeping the disease levels low and the mite levels low. You'll, you know, reduce or eliminate the likelihood that your bees will abscond. And then, of course, you know, taking proper precautions and not losing them during a package installation or a swarm installation. Of course, I still have this queen excluder here on the bottom of this box because in a previous crash course video I was talking about how to keep a swarm in a box, and that is by putting it up above a queen excluder. So, you know, use those tools while you're installing bees, and then keep disease and mite levels low, and you won't see any absconds. Okay, so that's it. Next up is most common beginner mistakes. That should be another cool video. I hope you're digging it. Thanks for watching. Get out there and have some fun with your bees. See ya.